a man is seen abandoning a small puppy by the side of the road, believing it is too naughty and troublesome to keep. 3 years later, that puppy has grown into a stray dog, surviving on its own in a traditional market. It lives by stealing food and slowly becomes known as a troublesome street dog. One day, a man named Pedro arrives at the market. He works as an assistant chef at a luxurious 5-star restaurant, and he is there to buy expensive meat requested by the head chef. When Pedro reaches his usual butcher shop, the seller immediately drives him away. The butcher expresses his dislike for Pedro's boss, the head chef, who is known for being arrogant and rude. He makes it clear that the restaurant is no longer welcome to buy meat from his shop. Since Pedro has been a loyal customer for a long time, he tries to calm the situation by offering one of his homemade snacks to the butcher. After tasting it, the butcher's attitude instantly changes. He softens, smiles, and finally agrees to sell the meat that the head chef ordered. At the same time, Pedro notices a dog stealing sausages from the corner of the shop. Realizing it is a stray that often roams the market, Pedro tries to distract the butcher so the theft goes unnoticed. But when the dog runs outside, several other stray dogs block its path. In the chaos, the dog manages to escape by sneaking into Pedro's car without him realizing it. While driving back to the restaurant, Pedro nearly hits a beautiful woman named Camila, who is walking with several dogs. He quickly stops the car and tries to apologize, but she angrily scolds him and walks away without listening. Once he arrives at the restaurant, Pedro uses the extra time before opening to prepare his signature snack, coccinha. Not long after, his coworker Paula arrives. She wonders why Pedro always comes so early and spends so much time in the kitchen. She starts lecturing him, but because she talks too much, Pedro casually feeds her the snack. She instantly goes quiet, surprised by how delicious it tastes. Pedro then explains that the recipe came from his mother and has been passed down through generations. Deep down, he wants to suggest the snack to the head chef as a new menu item, but he doubts that such a simple street food belongs in a 5-star restaurant. Night falls and the restaurant finally opens for service. In the middle of the busy kitchen, the restaurant owner, Martha, approaches the head chef, Sandro. She reminds him that a famous food critic will be arriving that evening to evaluate their restaurant. Martha stresses that perfection is everything because even a small mistake could damage the reputation of a 5-star establishment. After she leaves, Sandro orders Pedro to prepare the expensive meat that was purchased earlier that morning. But while working, Pedro suddenly feels a sharp and painful headache. He is forced to step out of the kitchen to take some medicine. Once he feels a little better, he returns to his station, unaware that the stray dog hiding in his car has quietly slipped into the kitchen with him. Not long after, the food critic arrives and carefully observes every detail of the restaurant. Martha greets her warmly and assures her that the best dishes will be served shortly. In the kitchen, Sandro and his team begin preparing the special meat dish for the critic. At the same time, the stray dog suddenly appears and causes chaos in the kitchen. Annoyed, Sandro tries to strike the dog, but Pedro steps in and begs him to stop, explaining that the dog is only hungry. As tension rises, Martha steps in and orders the dog to be removed, telling everyone to refocus on their work because there is no time for distractions. Her words only anger Sandro further, as he feels his authority as head chef has been undermined. Overwhelmed by emotion, he quits on the spot and walks out of the restaurant. His sudden departure throws everything into chaos, especially with the food critic still waiting. With no other choice, Pedro reluctantly steps in to take over as head chef. However, another problem appears when they realize the expensive meat has already been eaten by the dog. Using what little remains, Pedro comes up with an idea and decides to prepare his signature snack, coccinha. When the dish is served, the critic looks confused. Martha explains that the previous head chef has left and that the dish was prepared by another cook. When Pedro steps forward and introduces himself, he looks visibly nervous. He explains that coccinha is his favorite food from childhood, made with care using his mother's recipe. After hearing this, the critic slowly begins to taste the dish. Not long after, Martha returns to the kitchen and announces that coccinha will officially become part of the restaurant's menu, as the critic truly enjoyed the simple dish. Martha then approaches Pedro and hands him the head chef's uniform, telling him that from this moment on, he is officially the new head chef of the restaurant. Pedro smiles in disbelief, realizing that his childhood dream has finally come true. Later that night, after finishing work, Pedro steps outside and finds the stray dog waiting for him. Gently, he wonders how the dog managed to find him again. after their brief encounter earlier that day. He gives the dog some food as a small gesture of thanks. Even though they have only known each other for a short time, the dog has already changed Pedro's life in ways he never expected. From that moment on, nothing in Pedro's life would be the same. This is Caramelo. When Pedro arrives back at his apartment, he makes a video call with his mother while proudly showing off his new chef uniform. His mother looks genuinely happy, proud to see how far he has come in the big city. She tells him how much she misses him and hopes he can come home, even if only for a short visit. Pedro gently reassures her that once his work becomes more stable and he can take a short break, he will definitely come home to see her. As Pedro prepares to go to bed, he suddenly hears barking outside his apartment. He is surprised to see the same dog standing there, soaked by the rain. At first, he tries to ignore it, but his heart softens when he sees how cold and helpless the dog looks. In the end, Pedro lets the dog inside. He prepares a simple sleeping spot and cooks a burger so they can eat together. But just as the food is ready, the dog ends up eating Pedro's burger instead. Pedro almost loses his temper, but a sharp headache suddenly hits him again. The dog immediately comes closer and tries to comfort him by licking his head. After taking his medicine, the pain slowly fades. Pedro lies down to rest and gently reminds the dog to behave. The next morning, Pedro wakes up to find his apartment in complete chaos because of the dog. Feeling overwhelmed, he decides to take the dog to a nearby dog training school, hoping someone else might adopt it. When he arrives, he sees Camila, the same woman he nearly hit with his car the day before. She turns out to be a professional dog trainer and is busy working with an aggressive dog. Around the same time, a woman named Lucy greets Pedro and asks about the dog he brought. Pedro admits that he has not even named the dog yet since they have only just met. Soon after, Camila approaches and immediately recognizes him as the man from the previous day. Pedro apologizes and explains that he plans to leave the dog there because he does not feel capable of taking care of it, especially with how mischievous it is. During their conversation, Pedro's headache suddenly returns. Once the dizziness eases, he explains that these headaches have been happening more often whenever he feels exhausted. Camila notices that the dog keeps licking Pedro's head and asks why. Pedro admits he does not know, only that the dog always does it whenever he feels unwell. Camila then explains that animals have strong instincts and suggests that Pedro should see a doctor. That same day, Pedro decides to go to the hospital for a medical checkup. After a series of tests, the doctor explains that he has been diagnosed with brain cancer. The news hits Pedro hard. Later that evening at the restaurant, his mind is filled with fear and uncertainty. He secretly searches for information about his illness on his phone, but the more he reads, the more terrified he becomes. His anxiety begins to affect his focus, and his cooking starts to fall apart. Martha notices something is wrong and confronts him. Pedro tries to stay calm and explains that he stayed up late the night before, experimenting with new menu ideas. Paula supports his excuse, helping to cover for him. Soon after, Pedro asks for 2 weeks off, promising that when he returns, he will bring a new dish that can elevate the restaurant's reputation even further. That same afternoon, Pedro leaves the restaurant early. When he checks his phone, he finds a voice message from his mother asking how his first day as head chef went. Hearing her voice, Pedro feels a strong urge to tell her the truth, that he has cancer and is terrified of facing it alone. But he cannot bring himself to say it, so he simply replies that everything is fine. After that, Pedro returns to Camila's place to pick up the dog he had left there. Deep down, he feels grateful to the dog for helping him once again. He realizes that if the dog had not licked his head when he was in pain, he might never have discovered his illness so early. Pedro decides to take the dog home and keep him. He buys a floor bed, special dog food, and other supplies they might need. Since they are now living together, Pedro sets a few simple rules to keep things safe and comfortable. While bathing the dog, he suddenly realizes he never gave him a name. Inspired by the dog's caramel-colored fur, Pedro names him Caramelo. The next day, Pedro is scheduled to begin chemotherapy at the hospital. He asks an elderly neighbor to look after Caramelo while he is away. It is his first time going through chemotherapy. While there, he meets another patient named Leo, who casually starts a conversation with him. Leo tries to lift Pedro's spirits by showing him a handmade flipbook filled with playful, moving drawings. Seeing the silly images finally makes Pedro laugh, and little by little, the heavy sadness in his chest begins to ease. When Pedro returns home, he is shocked to find his apartment completely messy. The old lady sits nearby, exhausted and overwhelmed, clearly defeated by Caramelo's behavior. She complains about how troublesome the dog is. Pedro is about to scold Caramelo, but before he can, a wave of nausea hits him. He rushes to the bathroom and throws up. Caramelo quickly comes over, worried, and stays close to him. As Pedro gently pets the dog, he feels confused and overwhelmed. He cannot bring himself to tell his mother about his illness, yet he also feels unable to face everything on his own. The next day, Pedro takes Caramelo to Camila's dog school to enroll him in training, so his behavior can improve. Training begins right away. Week after week passes smoothly. When Pedro reads the progress reports, Caramelo scores fairly well. He becomes calmer, more obedient, and better at socializing. However, throughout his time at the school, Caramelo refuses to eat. As a reward for his good behavior, Pedro allows Caramelo to eat anything he wants that night. They eat together while watching television. Caramelo seems especially fascinated by a program about the ocean. Seeing this, Pedro gets an idea and thinks about taking Caramelo to the beach, since his hometown is by the sea. In that moment, Pedro realizes that Caramelo might be gently guiding him back home, toward his mother and the place he once came from. The next day, they set off together toward Pedro's hometown. When they arrive at the front gate, Pedro sees his mother watering the plants. He hesitates for a moment, unsure if he should step forward. Suddenly, Caramelo jumps out and runs toward her. She lights up with joy as she finally reunites with her beloved son. She quickly notices that Pedro looks troubled and asks if something is wrong. Pedro wants to tell her about his illness, but just imagining the sadness on her face makes him hold back. Instead, he says he is dealing with work problems and needs to create a new menu for the restaurant. Hearing this, his mother immediately invites him to cook together.
Vê que está bom.
Afterward, Pedro takes Caramelo to the beach to play. As he watches the ocean, Caramelo looks genuinely happy, as if he has returned to a place that feels like home. The next day, while helping take care of the dogs, Pedro invites Camila to have dinner at his restaurant, promising to treat her as a special guest. When Lucy hears about the free dinner, she quickly joins in and makes sure they will both come that evening. That night, while Pedro is working in the kitchen, Martha arrives with a bright smile and tells him that the guests love his new menu and are praising the food. As Pedro checks one of the dishes, he feels that it lacks salt and adds much more than usual. Paula, standing beside him, notices how much hair Pedro has lost and begins to understand why he has looked so unwell lately. Pedro panics but tries to stay calm, quickly covering his head so no hair falls into the food. In the middle of the chaos, Martha returns with a complaint from a guest saying the food is too salty. When Paula tastes it, she agrees. But Pedro cannot sense the saltiness at all. To him, the flavor feels normal. He keeps tasting the dish, hoping his senses are not failing him, because losing his sense of taste would mean the end of his career as a chef. Not long after, a severe headache strikes again, and Pedro collapses. When he wakes up at the hospital and prepares to leave, Camila is already waiting for him. Pedro tries to reassure her, saying he is just exhausted, but Camila reveals that she already knows the truth. She had pretended to be his wife to speak directly with the doctor. Hearing this, Pedro breaks down in tears. For so long he had carried everything alone, and now he finally lets his fears pour out. At that moment, the doctor explains that the chemotherapy has not worked, and the tumor in Pedro's brain has grown larger. Within a week, he must undergo brain surgery with only a 5% chance of success. As Camila walks him home, Pedro thanks her for everything she has done and asks her not to visit him again. The next day, Pedro isolates himself in his apartment, completely drained of hope. He even resigns from his job at the restaurant. Not long after, Leo comes to visit, having heard about Pedro's condition from a hospital nurse. Leo tries to lift his spirits, encouraging him to enjoy whatever time he has left without regret. Pedro treasures every moment they spend together and thanks Leo for bringing light back into his life. Before leaving, Leo asks for one promise. If Pedro survives the surgery and regains his sense of taste, he wants Pedro to cook a delicious meal for him. Pedro agrees, holding on to that small spark of hope. That night at the dog school, Lucy and Camila look worried. They have just received a notice saying the rent is overdue. If it is not paid soon, they will be forced to leave, along with all the dogs they have been caring for and training. In the middle of their panic, Pedro arrives. Camila tries to hide the situation, but Pedro has already heard everything. He offers to help and also apologizes to Camila for what he said the night before. Then he suggests they take a short walk at the night market, hoping to clear their minds for a moment. The next morning, Pedro prepares breakfast for Camila. As she enjoys the meal, he finally shares what has been weighing on his heart. If his surgery fails, he asks her to take care of Caramelo in his place. After that, Pedro shares an idea to save the dog school. But before putting the plan into action, he decides to tell his mother the truth about his illness. After finally opening up to his mother, Pedro feels an overwhelming sense of relief. Knowing his time may be limited, he borrows his late father's old minibus. Not long after, Paula comes to help, having quit her job after the new head chef treated her badly. When they check the vehicle, they realize it is badly damaged from years of neglect. That same day, Pedro, Paula, Leo, and Caramelo begin fixing it together. Once the food truck is ready, Pedro shows it to Camila and Lucy. They all feel hopeful, knowing that once the business starts running, the dog school might finally be saved. The next day, knowing that Leo is undergoing chemotherapy, Pedro prepares a special snack, certain that Leo will love it. But when Pedro arrives at the hospital, he is told that Leo has passed away. In truth, Leo's condition had been severe for some time, yet he remained strong to encourage Pedro. The news leaves Pedro heartbroken. A male nurse then hands him a flipbook that Leo had prepared as a final gift. As Pedro flips through the pages filled with drawings and messages, he smiles softly, realizing that Leo's spirit and joy now live on within him. Later, Pedro sits beside a young boy who is about to undergo chemotherapy for the first time. He gently comforts the boy, just as Leo once comforted him, trying to bring a sense of warmth and hope into the moment. The next day, once the food truck is finally ready to operate, Pedro gathers everyone and lifts their spirits. He encourages the team to give their best, not only to honor Leo's memory, but also to save the dog school. They open for business that day, but from morning until late afternoon, not a single customer shows up. Just as hope begins to fade, the old lady arrives with a group of her friends. Not long after, the food critic also appears and once again tastes Pedro's special dish. For the second time, she is deeply impressed. She even offers to become an investor if Pedro ever decides to open his own restaurant. That night, after the food truck closes, Pedro prepares a meal for Caramelo. But the dog keeps barking for no clear reason, as if trying to warn him about something. Pedro feels confused, and suddenly a sharp headache strikes while the stove is still on. He collapses and loses consciousness. Thanks to Caramelo's desperate efforts to draw attention, Pedro's life is saved. When he wakes up, he finds himself in the hospital. The doctor explains that his condition has worsened, and the surgery must be moved forward to that very night. Pedro asks about Caramelo, and his mother explains that dogs are not allowed inside the hospital. Hearing this, Pedro breaks down and begs to see him one last time. He wants to thank his loyal companion. While Camila and his mother step outside, Camila quickly comes up with a plan, and in the end, Caramelo is brought in. Seeing his beloved dog, Pedro is overwhelmed with emotion. They share a quiet moment, bound by a deep and unspoken connection. Not long after, the brain surgery begins. Against all odds, the 5% miracle happens, and the operation is a success. Months later, Pedro is living a happier life, as if he has been given a second chance. He and Camila get married, and Caramelo graduates from dog school, even though his playful nature never truly fades. Years pass filled with warmth and love. Pedro and Camila welcome a baby boy into their family. Together they open a dog cafe called Caramelo, where people can enjoy food while spending time with dogs. As time goes on, Caramelo grows old. One day he becomes weak and can no longer move like he used to. He lies quietly nearing the end of his journey while Pedro stays faithfully by his side. When the television shows scenes of the ocean and sharks, Caramelo lets out a soft sound as if expressing a final wish. Understanding what it means, Pedro takes him to the beach. The story ends with Pedro and Caramelo spending their final moments together, peacefully remembering the long journey that brought them to this moment. So, the moral of the story is never underestimate a stray dog, a simple snack, or your own bad decisions, because one random day of chaos can turn you into a chef, a patient, a hero, and a dog dad all at once.